Good day to you, fellow sojourners of the Bible. I hope you are well. Several of you have told me you are behind, but are hoping to catch up. Others of you have told me that you are ahead, and still a couple of others have told me that you are able to keep right on track every day. Well, regardless, it is all good. Reading the Bible or listening to the Bible, as I often do, is a marathon, and being steady is the key. I exercise regularly, sometimes running at a fairly quick pace, other times barely jogging, sometimes walking, and then sometimes taking a day off to rest a bit. The goal is to keep my heart healthy and my weight down. And so it is with reading the Bible. We read it to keep our heart in step with God, allowing God to transform us. Our pace will vary a bit each day, but we keep on going, trusting God to do God's work in our life. Well, our time in the Old Testament this week continues in Numbers. It begins with a great story, or kind of a great story, hard story in other ways, but Moses sends 12 spies into the Promised Land, the land of milk and honey. This is the time when the people are about to see God fulfill the promise God made to Abraham many, many years before. The promise of a good land. You will remember that there are lots of people, so that promise has already been fulfilled. So the 12 spies are chosen and go into the land, and they marvel at how good that land really is. They bring back good fruit, and they marvel at how beautiful the land is and how the agriculture will be able to feed them. Yet, 10 of the 12 spies don't just look at the land. They look at the big walled cities and the large inhabitants, and, well, they get scared. Their fear is greater than their faith, and they sow seeds of discontent, of fear, and they put in doubt God's power to the people of Israel. The people grumble, and they complain, and they set up a Back to Egypt committee. Yet, 2 of the spies see God instead of fear, and they sow seeds of faith, and they remind people of God's power and God's strength. The 2 spies, Joshua and Caleb, seek to convince the people that God is with them, and they will be able to conquer the land, and the land has been given to them by God. Joshua and Caleb try to encourage people to stay faithful. Unfortunately, it is not enough. The people's fear is greater than their faith, and they rebel against Moses and Aaron. But really, they are rebelling against God. We will read that God's anger burns, but Moses intercedes on behalf of the people. This is an important story, I think, because in it we see the faithlessness of the people. The majority of the people listen to fear and doubt instead of faith. God disciplines the whole people, and they have to wander in the wilderness for another 40 years until all the people have died. There are a lot of takeaways in this story, I guess, but the big question I want to ask you this week is this. Are you looking at the God who is able to do all things, or are you living out of fear for the things you might face? Again, I'm going to ask that question again. Are you looking at the God who is able to do all things, or are you living out of fear for the things you might face? We will also read this week about more offerings and more laws. And again, I will point out that there are different types of laws, ceremonial, civil, and moral. You can watch the video from a couple weeks ago for that information. There are a couple of stories that are interesting, but kind of hard to understand. For example, Moses hits a rock twice instead of once, and God punishes him, and he can't go into that promised land. In some ways, that seems like a little bit harsh, but we trust that God is God. In another, God sends poisonous snakes when the people grumble and complain. Yet God also saves the people by having Moses make a bronze serpent, and when it is lifted high, the people look at it and they're saved. Admittedly, at least in our ears, it's kind of a strange story, but it is a story that Jesus remembers, and he uses it as a reminder for us to look up to him on the cross for our salvation. He said in John 3, "As Moses lifted up the bronze snake on a pole in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, so that everyone who believes in him will have eternal life." We also read the interesting story of Balak and Balaam and the talking donkey, and it's a favorite of many people. I'm guessing it is because not many of us have ever come across a talking donkey before. You know, there are a ton of things that I could say about that, but I'll just leave it at that and let the story speak for itself. The point of the story as a whole is that Balaam cannot curse the people, and he ends up blessing them instead. Regardless of how the story begins, he can only speak what God has told him to do, to say. God will bless the people. We read this week that since Moses could not go into the promised land, the people need a new leader. And Joshua is chosen and commissioned to be that leader. Of course, he was one of the spies who was faithful. God honors those who remain faithful. We won't pick up his story until after Deuteronomy, but it sets the stage for God keeping his promise to Abraham. Well, I'll be honest with you, I'm a little short on time this week, so I'm going to let Mark's gospel stories speak for themselves. What you need to know, remember, is Jesus is active and goes from one place to the next, sharing good news, healing, teaching, helping. As you read the Jesus story this week, simply ask yourself, how does this story interact with my story? And how am I doing, really doing, at following Jesus? Well, sorry that this episode was a little short, but other things I need to spend some time on, and I thank you for your understanding. Above all, as we continue this journey, I pray that God will continue to bless us, transform us, and we will remain faithful. See you next week, friends.